Greetings once again. My name is Peter. I'd like to talk briefly about our upcoming Salt and Light session. It will be on July 6th at 9 a.m. by Zoom. We will be studying lesson number 5, From Empty Worship to Pure Hearts. The scripture texts are Mark 7, verses 5 through 23, and Matthew 5, verses 7 through 8. The stated purpose is to study the same incident as last week, but from a different gospel, noting unique features in the two accounts and applying Mark's radical interpretation of Jesus' teaching. Per Geddert, page 26. Now, last week, we learned from Matthew that we should not allow man-made laws to supersede God's laws, because Jesus said so. This week, we will look at the same interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees, but this time through the eyes of the Apostle Mark. Discussion may take one of several different routes. We might talk about how New Testament scripture can be used to discern Old Testament laws. Remember, Matthew was not concerned with reinterpreting Old Testament laws. He was concerned with man-made laws superseding the laws of God. But understand that God had given dietary laws to the Israelites. Mark makes it clear that something had changed. We could ask, what else besides dietary laws of Moses might be presented differently by Jesus? Another very interesting corollary question is whether or not today's Christian Jews have a different relationship to the Mosaic laws than Gentiles do. A closely related question is whether New Testament scripture can be used to discern how we are to live today. For example, where does science fit in? Geology has pushed back the age of the earth many millions of years. Astronomy has pushed back the timeline of creation billions of years. How does that jive with our faith? Does it impact at all? There was an interesting article in Sojourners very recently, and it talked about the Scopes trial. Of course, we could talk about that facet of how our understanding of the science of creation is impacted by the Bible. But I will tell you that the point of that article was discussing who will be controlling education. Probably the most important question is to talk about how we can reach consensus in our community. How do we reach consensus in our worship and fellowship community? Anabaptists have typically looked to confessions rather than creeds. The first one was in the year 1527, and it's called the Schleitheim Confession. The most recent one was published in 1995. It's called the Confession of Faith in an Anabaptist Perspective. If you're interested in that line of discussion, you might refer to an Anabaptist Perspective podcast entitled, Do Anabaptists Affirm Early Church Creeds? That was published in June 5th, 2025, episode 270. I will put a link to that in the text below. There was an interesting podcast on the Russell Moore Show. On February 9th of this year, Russell interviewed the author of Bowling Alone. The title of the podcast is Beyond Bowling Alone, Finding Community in an Isolated Age. The introduction says, Moore and Putnam consider the importance of coming together, exploring this history of communities in America, and encouraging listeners with practical steps for cultivating fellowship. Tim Geddert points out that, according to Mark, Jesus looked his disciples straight in the eye and told them that all foods are clean. It took them decades to understand that one simple principle. I wonder what other freedoms we are overlooking 2,000 years later because we have kept reading Scripture the same old way. Just as importantly, what God-ordained boundaries are we glibly ignoring just because we keep reading Scriptures the same old way? We never look for a new perspective. Please join me this week in praying that we will learn to properly discern all of the words of Jesus and put them into action in our lives. Coming up tomorrow night, Wednesday, July 2nd, we'll be continuing our study of Romans. We will start at Romans chapter 1, verse 16. Sunday, Salt and Light, is at 9 o'clock by Zoom. Everything that we do is by Zoom, incidentally, and we use the same links. So please do get in touch with me if you would like the login information. After the Salt and Light, which usually means we start at 10:15 a.m., we'll participate in the Riverside Anabaptist Collective by viewing episode 5 of the 12-part series Good Foundations by Carmen Shenk. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, we socialize. We have a website and a weekly newsletter. Click on the links below for more information, and go in peace.